In this lecture, we're going to see how you work with REST APIs in your QML applications. We are going to work with the API service that is provided by this website here. It is called icndb.com, and it gives a funny API that fetches Chuck Norris jokes. So you want to come to Database RESTful APIs and click on this link here. And they show you the documentation on their API. If you go down, they give you a list of links you can use to get the APIs. We want to use this one. You want to copy it and open it in a new tab. I'm going to open it like this. And if I call it like this, it is going to give me 3 jokes. You see that I am opening this in a browser. I am using Firefox right now. You can use whatever you want. But Firefox by default gives me this good display that helps me see my data very well. I'm going to increase the size so that you see what we get. Okay, we get a JSON object really, and inside we have a type attribute, which is whether we were successful or not. And inside we have a value array, and it contains JSON objects as well. On the 0 index, we have this object. Inside, we have an ID, the joke attribute here, and the categories array, but this array is empty for now. Let's try to pass in 10 to see if this changes anything. Nothing really. The categories array is empty, but we are interested in the joke here. So what we're going to do, we're going to get this data, parse it in our QML code, and fetch the data that we have in here. And we're going to display this in a list view. And when we get the data from the internet, we're going to find a way to put that in our model so that it is displayed by the view. We're going to go to Qt Creator and do that. Here we are in Qt Creator. We're going to create our project. It's a Qt Quick application. We call it REST APIs demo. Store it in the usual location. Hit next. Choose your Qt version. Choose your kit. And finish. We want to change the title here to say REST APIs demo. And we want to import Qt Quick controls because we're going to need a button and a spin box. We also want Qt Quick layouts. We're going to use 1 for down here. We want to put in a column layout. It is going to fill the parent. We want a spacing of 0. Inside, we're going to have a list view, a spin box component that is going to allow us to specify the number of jokes that we want, and a button that is going to kick off the download of the APIs. The list view is going to have an ID, list view ID, as usual. Spin box is going to be spin box ID, and button is going to be button ID. I don't know if you're going to need the ID for the button, but we put it in anyway. We also want a list model for the list view, so we're going to say list model, ID list model. And it's going to be just like this. We are going to put in the data dynamically as we get the data from the REST APIs. So we can specify a model for our list view here. List model ID. I like to put ID at the end so we know it's an ID. This list view is going to need a delegate. We're going to go down below everything and define a component that is going to be our delegate. I don't want to type all this, so I prepared it before, and I'm going to put it in and try to explain it. If you have watched the chapter on model view architecture, this is not going to be new to you. So it is a delegate. We have the ID. Inside we have a rectangle with a bunch of properties, width, height, color. And inside we have a text component that is going to display jokes in our case here. And we applied some decoration on the text component to make it look better. We set a font size We centered it in the parent, and you see that we applied some margin on the rectangle to make the text have some breathing room. We also want to align the text in the rectangle, and we are wrapping to not have our text chopped off. This is really all we have. We can go back to our list view and specify a delegate. It's going to be delegate ID, I guess. Yes, it is. Okay, now that we have our delegate, we want to make the list view fill the available space. We're going to say layout, fill width, set this to true, layout, fill height, and set this to true. Let's take one column away, and we want the others to fill the available width. Okay, so we say spin box and button fill the width. For the spin box, we want to specify the value that is going to be in by default. We want to have a tan inside, Control A, Control I to align things. And for the button, we want to have the text that is going to be shown. Let's say fetch. And when it is clicked, we want to know. And this is where we are going to kick off the download of our data. So we want to put in the function that is going to fetch the JOCs. We go to the top here and say function fetch JOCs. It's going to take a URL, just like we did in the last lecture, really. We're going to just download HTTP data. We just happen to get JSON data from this request. Inside, we're going to pass in a callback. Same thing, really, as the last lecture. So inside, we are going to do the same thing we did in the last lecture. You see, we are creating our XML HTTP request object. We are calling open and send here. And when the ready state changes, we get that here. If we are done, we check to see if the status is okay. And we console log resource found. We don't want to set the text ID. We don't have that here. Let's check this out. And we call back a method with the response text that we got from the internet. Okay, this is really the same thing. This part is completely the same as the last lecture. We just changed the name of the function here to reflect what we are doing here. So when you click the button, we want to call the fetch JOCs method. Let's do that. Okay, we want to pass in the URL. Let's go back to our REST API service here. Copy the URL that we are passing in here. We are going to put the same URL inside here, but this number is going to be dynamic. It's not going to be static like this. So we're going to put a quote here and add that number dynamically. So we're going to say plus spin box ID value. We get the value that is in the spin box. We can change this at runtime by clicking the plus or minus button. But when we click the button here, we're going to get whatever value is in the spin box. I hope this makes sense. And after this, we want to pass in our callback function response. We want to pass in the parameter list and provide the body for our function here. Oh, we don't want this parameter list. We put that in the response. Sorry for that. I'm going to shrink this so that we have more area to see what is going on. Okay, now we have our response here. So what we're going to do is console log it to see what we are getting actually and know that our logic here is working. We're going to console log response like this. Let's run the application and see that our logic is working. We have our user interface here. There is nothing in here because the model is empty. If we hit fetch, notice what we get. Okay, we say type success, value, ID, JOC, Chuck Norris, and things like that. Okay, we have our data. We want to parse it actually and put the data in our model. We want to check if we got a correct response. So we say if response, we do parse the data. And if we have no response, Let's say console log, something went wrong. This will do. Now what we want to do is turn the data into a JSON object that we can parse. We say var object equals JSON parse, and we pass in the string that we want to parse. So we say response. This is what we want. Now what we want to do is loop Okay, we want to loop over this to capture our jokes. I want to go back to our browser and look at the structure of the response we get, because we obviously want to know that. Notice that our object is going to contain the attribute of type and an array of value. Okay, we want to actually loop over this array and capture these objects. So if you don't know how to loop over an array, you can actually open your favorite search engine and type in I think it's going to give us the documentation for JavaScript. You come here, and what you want to look at is built-in objects, look at array, and there are methods that we can call on this array. One of those methods is for each, and you can use this to loop over an array. You can look at this to see how you can loop over your array. This is what we are going to use. So we are going to go to our code and say object values, because if you go back to our response we got, we have a value array. It's not values, it's value. So you need to check your things and say for each. Inside we pass in a callback function, just like what we did with our requests. It is going to pass a parameter of joke, and what we have in here is going to be our joke object. We want to go in the body of the function and do something with the joke data that we have. We actually want to capture this data and put that in the model. Okay, we want to get the joke out of the joke object. What we are going to take here is going to be one of these elements. You see we have many elements. We're going to take one element, and this is going to be one joke, and we want to capture the joke out of that. I hope this makes sense. So what we're going to do, we're going to capture the ID of our model. It's called mlist model ID. Let's say mlist model ID, append. We want to append data, and we want to append this as a JSON object. So we're going to say joke. Okay, we want to put a colon here and say joke. Joke is our object that we pass in here, and we want to take the joke out of it. Notice that we did everything we had to do, but we did it in the wrong place. So we should copy this and put that when we get the data. Sorry for that, guys. Now we can run the application and see that we are getting the data and showing that in our model. Let's run. Okay, we have our application here. Let's change to make it fetch 5 jokes. Fetch, and you see that we have our jokes here. Let's fetch again. You see that our list keeps growing. You can increase the count, fetch again, and you see that we are fetching the jokes and showing them in our application here. The bulk of this application is really how you parse the data that you get. Getting the data is part of the last lecture. That's where we focused on getting HTML data from the internet. Now we want to parse the data as a JSON object and get whatever parts of that JSON object that we want. In this case, we want to get joke data and put that in our model using the append method dynamically. This is all I had to say in this lecture. I hope you know how to work with XML HTTP requests to both download HTTP data and parse that data as a JSON object if necessary. In the next chapter, we're going to see how you work with storage mechanisms that are provided to you by Qt Quick. I'll see you there.